This is not an easy texture combination to pull off. Hey friends, I hope your week is off to a great start. Today we're going to be trying out another recipe from Claire Saffitz's cookbook Dessert Person. These are her chocolate chip cookies. So if you've been on the channel for a while, you know that I'm a huge fan of chocolate chip cookies. In fact, I'm going to make a playlist of all the different versions of chocolate chip cookies that I've tried so that you can check those out if you're so inclined. So without any further ado, let's get right into this. This recipe includes brown butter, so we're starting off at the stove today. So here in my medium saucepan, I've got a stick of unsalted butter. I'm melting this down over medium heat, and then we're going to continue to cook it until that butter starts to bubble and boil. That's signaling to us that the water is evaporating out of the butter. This process in total should take about 5 to 7 minutes, depending on your stove, depending on your pan, and a bunch of other variables. So just keep an eye on it, keep stirring, because brown butter can go from brown to burnt in the blink of an eye. So do not walk away from this. It's not a set it and forget it situation. All right, so you can see that this is foaming quite a lot here. If you lift it off the heat for a moment, the foaming will subside and you can kind of get a better check on what the color of the butter is looking like. All right, and I think that's looking pretty good, so I'm going to kill the heat. I've got the second stick of butter cut into tablespoon-sized pieces, and we're just going to pour this brown butter over the top, scraping out all those yummy brown bits from the bottom of the pan. You don't want to waste anything here. So I'm going to stir this butter around just a bit. The recipe doesn't say you have to, however, we need the butter to cool down so that we can use it. So by having the cold sticks of butter mixed with the hot brown butter, that'll speed up the process of getting us down to about a room temperature butter. If you're in a really big hurry, you could pop this in the refrigerator just to cool it down even faster. While we're waiting for the brown butter to cool down a little bit, let's prep the other ingredients. So here in a medium bowl, I've got some AP flour. To that, I'm going to add some kosher salt and baking soda, and we'll just whisk this together to get it evenly combined. All right, and that looks nice and even, so we can set this aside until we're ready for it. So let's talk chocolate really quick. This recipe calls for both milk chocolate as well as semi-sweet chocolate. However, I absolutely hate milk chocolate. Even the really good stuff, it just kind of hits my throat in a funny way and burns from the sweetness. So I'm not a fan, so I am going to use only semi-sweet chocolate. This is not SponCon. I only buy Guitar chocolate now. I started this when I tried out Rick's brown butter toffee chocolate chip cookie years ago, and I love the chocolate. It's the only one that I will buy. It's expensive, but totally worth it. So with that said, we've got 10 ounces of chocolate total, and we need to chop half of this. If you are using two types of chocolate, you would have half your milk chopped, half your milk left in this wafer form, and then the same exact thing for the semi-sweet. So chop half of it, leave half of it whole. Since I'm doing only one type, I've got 2 bowls. We're gonna chop one bowl and leave the other one intact. And whenever I'm chopping chocolate, I always use a serrated knife. It really cuts down on the amount of chocolate flying around the kitchen that you get, as well as all of the kind of shardy pieces that are really challenging if you use a chef's knife. And the recipe actually does recommend that you use wafers here. Chocolate chips actually have stabilizers in them to help them keep their chocolate chip shape while baking. So they're really not designed to be melty, gooey, puddly. So if you can't get the wafers, a bar is more similar to the quality of chocolate that you would have in a wafer. So skip the chips, you can use it for something else. This recipe wants bar or wafer. And I think that looks pretty good. So I think every wafer in this pile has been cut through at least once. So we'll pop this back into our bowl until we're ready for it. So our brown butter's been hanging out for probably about 10 minutes at this point. You can see the little globs of stick butter that were in there have really softened up and they're almost fully melted. To this butter mixture, we're also going to add in some heavy cream. And this is really just to replace that liquid that evaporated off during the brown butter process with some additional fat. And you don't have to stir this mixture. You can just set it and leave it to cool down at room temperature. However, I'm a little bit impatient, so stirring it just kind of speeds up that process of cooling the butter down, incorporating it with the sticks of butter that are still kind of finishing up melting. This butter mixture has cooled down to about room temperature. It feels a little bit warm, but it is not hot whatsoever. So we are ready to proceed. So to the butter mixture, I'm going to add in our granulated sugar as well as our dark brown sugar. And we are going to vigorously whisk this until it's smooth and thick, about 45 seconds. And we're not going for a cakey, light and fluffy consistency, so we're not really trying to incorporate a ton of air. You just want to make sure that you've got those sugars really well incorporated into your butter. All right, and that's been about 45 seconds. You can see the texture here. It looks really smooth. So now that this is looking nice and smooth, we can add in our vanilla extract. And then we're gonna add in both of our eggs pulled from the refrigerator. I don't know what they're doing. It's some sort of gallery wall because it is non-stop all day long. pounding on the wall. All right, and we're gonna whisk this together vigorously until everything's incorporated, about 45 seconds. All right, so that's been about 45 seconds. You can see the texture here looks really nice, smooth. The color is so pretty from that brown butter. So then we're gonna dump in our prepared dry ingredients. I'm just gonna slowly whisk this to get that flour incorporated. Okay, and that looks good. The flour is just incorporated. You really don't want to over mix once you add the flour because that'll develop the gluten, which will give you a tougher cookie. So once the flour looks incorporated, just stop mixing. Now switching to my silicone spatula, I'm just giving a quick stir to make sure that there's nothing stuck to the edges of the bowl. So you can see the texture here is a little bit looser than a typical cookie dough. Claire said that's to be expected. The flour needs to hydrate a bit. But before we let it hydrate, let's add in the chocolate. So I've got the whole wafers as well as the coarsely chopped wafers. And now I'm just folding through the chocolate wafers to get them evenly incorporated. So those chocolate wafers are evenly incorporated here. So now we're just gonna set this aside for about 5 minutes to let the flour hydrate a bit, to let that dough thicken up, and then we can start portioning out our cookies. So our dough has been hydrating for a little over 5 minutes, so we're ready to portion it up. So I'm gonna be using a 2-ounce cookie scoop. I've got this linked in the description box below. This is a NorPro scoop. I really like this. If you don't have a cookie scoop that's 2 ounces, you could use just a 1/4 cup measuring cup and just scrape it out yourself. But you just want all your cookies to be about the same size. If you have something smaller, just keep in mind that the bake time will ultimately be just a little bit less. It's firmed up, but you can tell obviously it's still softer than a refrigerated cookie dough or something. And I'm trying to level off my scoop as much as possible. And you can scoop the dough as close together as you want because we're gonna have to move these to a baking tray to cook. So it's really just about fitting it in a compact space that will fit in your refrigerator. Perfect, so the recipe said that it would yield 18 cookies. I've got precisely 18 large cookie scoops here. So Claire is nothing if not accurate in her recipe writing. Now, what we need to do is let these chill in the refrigerator for a minimum of 12 hours and up to 48. So I'm gonna tightly wrap this with some cling film and then we'll let this hang out until tomorrow when we're ready to bake. So it is the next day. Our cookie dough's been hanging out in the refrigerator overnight for almost 24 hours at this point. It's directly out of the fridge, not up to room temperature, so it's still nice and firm. And now we just need to transfer it to the baking tray. Claire says to bake 6 cookies at a time, spacing them 3 inches apart. All right, perfect. So I'm baking only 6 cookies today. The rest of the dough I'm gonna put in my freezer for a later time when I have a cookie emergency. So since I'm baking only 6 cookies, I am gonna go on the center rack of the oven rather than the upper third and lower third. Claire says you can do it both ways, so it shouldn't be an issue. Oven is preheated to 350 degrees, and I'm gonna bake this for 18 to 22 minutes, though Claire does call out if you're baking only 1 tray in the center, it could bake a little bit faster, so we'll check it after 15. In total, my cookies baked for 18 minutes. I let them cool on the pan for about 10 minutes, and this is the end result. So you can see that the surface is nice and wrinkly, the cookies are golden brown, the bottoms have a beautiful bronze color as well, really nice profile. Overall, a super attractive cookie. So I'm really happy with how these turned out. The aroma on these is fantastic. They're not greasy at all. The amount of spread we got is exactly what I was expecting. Sometimes with cookies in the past, I've had them spread out a little bit too much. However, this one seems to be checking all of the boxes for what I like in a nice chocolate chip cookie. So super excited to dig in. Let's give it a little snap for you. All right, so definitely a chewy texture here. The chocolate is starting to set up, but it's a little bit gooey still since we used the wafers. Nice. Wow. So we've got the crispy edge, which I like. Crispy, crunchy on the outside, gooey and chewy on the inside. This is not an easy texture combination to pull off, so very pleasantly surprised with that. The cookie is not overly sweet at all. So this cookie is noticeably crisper than Crisp Morocco's cookie, kind of as I expected because this does have a higher proportion of granulated sugar versus brown sugar. So granulated sugar gives you crisp, brown sugar gives you chew. I like a chewy cookie, but I don't want it to be too chewy because I want a little bit of crisp and texture contrast. And so I really like the balance of flavors and textures that are going on in this cookie. It's not all one note. So if you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan of this cookie. I definitely would recommend you give it a try. Really hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please be sure to give me a big thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week.